بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه توكلت على الله ربي يسر يا كريم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. Welcome everyone to our fourth session of Principles of the Islamic Faith. Inshallah you can hear me well. I hope you can hear me well, inshallah. So as soon as people just confirm that sound works okay, please just let me know. As soon as people confirm that the sound works okay, we'll start. And let me get my door as well, because we have some work getting done here at the masjid, so there might be a little bit of background noise, and that might interfere with our live session. All right, seems like people can hear me well, alhamdulillah. So let's kind of really briefly remind ourselves of what we've done last time. What we looked at is a question that says, does God exist? And we've looked at an objection to the fact that God exists, which is okay, because we live in a world where people do have objections, and people, as a result, there are tendencies towards atheism, which is the belief that God does not exist, or at least, or maybe more accurately, the lack of belief that God exists. So people who say that God doesn't exist, they have this idea, and they say there's evil in the world, and God is all goodness, infinite goodness, and the cause of all goodness. So if God is the cause of all goodness, why does evil exist in the world? And as a result, they say God does not exist. We answer them and we say, no, God does exist. And we have some proofs that we want to present. And not only proofs that come to us from the Quran, or come to us from the Sunnah or the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ, or even from any religious teachings, as much as they actually come to us from logic, from reason, from our ability to think, from our senses and our observation of the world around us. Why are we doing that? We're doing this because everyone can think, inshallah, hopefully. Everyone can reason, everyone can look and observe the world and use their senses, and therefore everyone can use these ways, these proofs, to understand and to reach the conclusion that God does in fact exist. We also learn them because we live in a world where, especially young people, but almost everyone, I now see adults who have religious or doubts as far as their faith. When we learn these logical, reasonable ways, rational ways of the existence of God, before we start actually learning about what our aqidah teaches as far as what God is, and the attributes, and the names of God, and so on and so forth, when we learn it in this way, we protect, and at least it's like working out. You work out, you take vitamins, you protect yourself and your faith from being susceptible to viruses or bacteria. When you get them, you are at least immune and you are strong. But if you let yourself be weak, you don't take care of your health, you don't eat well, you don't exercise, what happens when you get sick? Your chances of battling and fighting that virus are much lower. So that's what we do here. That's what we are trying to learn in these sessions. Kind of, you can think about them as introductory sessions to learning about God from an Islamic perspective. So we're learning about God and the existence of God from a rational perspective, so that hopefully, inshallah, as we kind of progress and learn all of these rational ways of proving God's existence, we will be stronger in our faith. So last time we looked at what St. Thomas Aquinas, who is a philosopher, theologian from the Catholic tradition, the Catholic faith, and he has what we call the 5 ways of proving God's existence. And last time we looked at the first way. And in a nutshell, what the first way says, and if you have gotten your sheet I sent on the WhatsApp group, it will explain to you these 5 ways, in kind of in an easy hopefully straightforward way. And we looked at the first one of them. What does it say? It says that the argument from motion. Motion means change. Everything in the world around us changed. The only constant is God. But everything else changed. Day and night, winter and summer, spring and fall, young, old, health and sickness, life, death. We look at this and we see all of these changes around us in the world, and that's what the Quran always wants us to look at. Don't you look at the sun? Don't you look at the moon? Don't you look at the night? Don't you look at the day? And you look at all of these motion or changes that happen. Even us, we change. We change from nothing to something, from young to old, from healthy to weak, from life to death. So our senses prove to us that some things, if not all things, are actually in motion. Now, these things move when potential motion becomes an actual motion, meaning something is moving them from something to something else, from point A to point B, from one state to another, from the state of health to the state of weakness, from the state of life to the state of death, from being young to being old. Who's making all of these? Only an actual motion can convert a potential motion into an actual motion, meaning something that has the capacity to move it, to make that change, to make that motion, can make that change happen. Nothing can be at once in both actuality and potentiality in the same respect, meaning nothing can have the ability to move itself from one state to another, from one point to another, to create that change in itself. We are not changing ourselves. We are not causing ourselves to grow. We are not causing ourselves to come to life. Therefore, nothing can move itself. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And that's from reason. That's not from religion. That's not from faith. That's not from the Quran or the Bible or anything else. That's observing the reality around us. Tells us that nothing can move itself. Nothing can move itself. Therefore, each thing in motion is moved by something else. That's what we conclude. If nothing can move itself, then there must be something that is mover, that is moving things, that it's causing that change. When we look at the tree, as we plant a seed in the ground, in the soil, and we water it, and we sit there and we see how it grows, what has made it to grow? What has caused it to grow? The seed itself does not have the ability to make itself grow, but something has caused it to grow. The sequence of motion cannot extend kind of infinitely, meaning we cannot, if we go back and say, okay, we can find the mover, the person, we can say the person who put the plant, okay, the water made the seed grow. Okay, so who watered this? Well, who watered this is a human being. So who created the water itself? Well, the water comes from rain. Well, where did the water come from rain in the first place? And we keep going into that chain of motion and chain of things moving other things, but we cannot go for infinitely. There has to be a beginning. Therefore, it is necessary to arrive at what we call the first mover, the first link in that chain that caused all the changes and the motion and the growth that we see around us in the world. Put in motion by no other, meaning that first link, that first mover, has not been moved by something else. And that everyone understands to be God. And I love when St. Thomas Aquinas says everyone, meaning you cannot argue against that. You cannot argue against that from reason, from observation, from the senses. Everyone who observes that must, at the end of the day, reach to that one conclusion, and that is there is a first mover, and we call that first mover God. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, the second way, and in fact all the other ways, this is one way, there are four more ways of looking at this, and almost all of them are kind of similar to each other's, but each of them look at a different thing. The first one looked at motion. Now the second one we will look at today, well, look at he says, let me read it first and then maybe go through a little bit of explanation. St. Thomas says, the second way is from the nature of the efficient cause. Now, the efficient cause is just a way of saying an agent or something or someone that brings a thing into being or initiates a change. Very similar to the first way. But instead of looking at motion and like change or move and mover and moved, we are looking at cause and effect. Cause and effect. Cause and effect. So he's saying when we look at nature, from the nature of the efficient cause, he says in the world of senses or of sense, meaning anyone can sense that if their senses are working properly, meaning you can see, you can hear, you can feel, you can smell, you can taste. We find there is an order of efficient causes. There is no case known, neither is it indeed possible, in which a thing can be found to be the efficient cause of itself. For so it would be prior to itself, which is impossible. What does that mean? Let's look at babies, for example. For example, when a baby is born, comes to this world, that baby that is born did not cause itself to exist. There has to be a man and a woman, a father and a mother, spouses, married. And that what causes a baby to be born. And we cannot say that that baby actually brought itself into existence, because it would mean that that baby had to exist before it actually existed. You can see how contradictory that is. You can see how contradictory that is. And so, like the meal, as we said before, you wake up in the morning, you find a meal on the kitchen table. You cannot say that meal actually caused its own self. That means that that meal existed before it actually existed in the form of a meal. Does not make any sense at all. If you're saying, wow, that's, doesn't make sense, you are saying the right thing. So he's saying here, nothing can be the efficient cause. Nothing can cause itself to exist. Now, in efficient causes, it is not possible to go on to infinity, because in all efficient causes following in order, the first is the cause of the intermediate cause, and the intermediate cause of the ultimate cause, whether the intermediate cause be several or only one. What does that mean? Exactly what we said with the first way. We cannot go in an infinite chain of cause and effect, cause and effect. We cannot just go like that for infinity. Now, to take away the cause is to take away the effect. He says if there is no cause, there is no effect. Right? That should be straightforward. If there isn't parents, a father and a mother, a man and a woman, spouses, married, there is no baby. If there is no cook in the kitchen, there is no food. And so on and so forth. Therefore, if there be no first cause among efficient causes, there will be no ultimate nor any intermediate cause. So for the people who say God doesn't exist, we say, okay, all right, I'm going to take your word for it. God doesn't exist. How come that you exist? What makes you existing? Because for you to exist, there had to be a first cause, an efficient cause. They will say, well, I exist because of my mom and dad. Sure, you exist because of your mom and dad. Who brought your mom and dad to the world? They're going to go back, and we're going to keep going into this. We cannot go out for infinity. So for someone to say God doesn't exist, they are basically saying, I do not exist. Because for them to exist, they are merely an effect of a cause. And we go in this chain of cause and effect until we reach what we call the first cause. But not only that, he says, but if in efficient causes it is possible to go on to infinity, there will be no first efficient cause, neither will there be an ultimate effect, nor any intermediate efficient cause, all of which is plainly false. He's saying, if we deny the existence of God, who is the first cause, the first efficient cause, then we deny all the other effects, which means we are saying the world does not exist. We do not exist. Nothing exists. which is false, does not make sense. Because when we look around us, we see the heavens and earth and sun and moon and stars and trees and people and food and fruits and good and bad and history and future and present. All of these things exist, which means there had to be a first cause. He says, therefore, it is necessary to admit. Underline this word necessary, which means not only that God exists, but it is necessary that God exists. It is impossible to deny the existence of God. It's impossible to say that God does not exist. So he says, therefore, it is necessary to admit a first efficient cause to which everyone gives the name of God. See how it goes? Cause and effect. Cause and effect. Cause and effect. And that's how it goes into this kind of chain. And I want you to exercise this with anything. Pick anything in the world and start tracing it back. First of all, you might not be able to trace it back infinitely, for sure, let alone even for just, trace it back to 100 years, 1,000 years, and even more than that. So anything in the world is an effect to a cause, and that cause is also by itself an effect to another cause, and that cause is an effect to another cause, and we keep going like this, but we cannot go like this infinitely. It must be a first cause which we all call God. And if we deny that God, then we deny that God created anything else, which means we deny pretty much the existence of the world. And that's why in the Christian tradition, they have a very, I like that saying, I love that saying, where it says, the fool says there is no God. Only a fool says there is no God. I think that comes from the what they call the Psalms, or the Psalms basically is like I believe it's the Zabur that we have mentioned in the Quran, and it says the fool says there is no God, meaning the fool who is they are fools. They don't understand. They don't think. Someone is asking, we can't see the heavens. That's true. You cannot see heavens. We're actually in this class, you're gonna learn about the heavens and hell and all of that. We will get to this part, but right now we're still in discussion regarding God. And when I say heavens, I mean actually this basically just like space. And we have seen that. People who went in spaceship and they were able to see the amazing vast world out there. So I don't mean heavens in the sense of paradise or Jannah. I mean heavens in the sense of like the physical realm which we can see and observe. I hope that clarifies your confusion. All right. So basically, to summarize that, again, what we call the second way. And by the way, inshallah, when we're done with all the 5 ways, we're going to have a Zoom class where everyone can ask questions. So please take notes. If you have questions, write them down. Don't give up on this class. Don't give up on these. I know it's very hard and difficult, but believe me, no matter how old you are, you're going to benefit from them greatly. So kind of to summarize the second way, we say that we perceive with our senses a series of efficient causes of things in the world. And nothing exists prior to itself. In order for something to exist, at a certain point, it did not exist. It was nothing. Basically, absolutely nothing, just like you and me. Therefore, nothing in the world of things we perceive is the efficient cause of itself. So, if I, Hassan Salim, was at a certain point in history prior to 11/11/87, or actually maybe 9 months before that, I did not exist in the world at all. Like, I was not even like, there wasn't a trace of me that existed in the world. Then there has to be a cause that brought me to existence. And then we say, if a previous efficient cause does not exist, neither does the thing that results. If that cause that brought me to life, okay, 9 months before 11/11/87, which is my birthday, then, therefore, if the first thing in a series does not exist, nothing in the series exists. So if there was no cause to bring me to life, I would have not been here with you today. You would not be knowing anyone named Hassan Salim. No one in the world would be like me. I wouldn't even, be like an atom that exists in that world. If my efficient cause, if the cause that brought me to life does not exist. If the series of efficient causes extends to like infinity into the past, for then there would be no things existing now. And that's plainly false, like we have said. There are things existing now in the world. I exist, so my cause existed, and the cause of my cause existed. Therefore, efficient causes do not exist infinitely into the past, and therefore it is necessary to admit a first efficient cause to which everyone gives the name God. So I can actually say, without religion, without Quran, without the prophets, without anything else, without even if I am blind and deaf and mute, the fact that I exist in that world is plainly the only proof for God's existence that I need. And that takes us back to the discussion we had last time. Will God not punish, I don't like to use the word punish here, but will God take into accountability people who did not believe in him, even though they did not receive a revelation from God? That's a good question to ask, and it's a valid question to ask. And people actually have different opinions. Some people say no, because the only way Allah will take us into accountability is the fact that we receive the revelation, that we have a messenger that to follow and we choose not to, and we have a revelation like the Torah, like the Bible, like the Quran, or any other revelation that came from God, and we decided not to believe. And some people say no, as long as you have a brain, then Allah you will be judged whether or not you believed, because you made a choice not to believe, even though it was plain and it was obvious that God existed, just from the fact that you as a human being and as a thing exists in that world. I hope that's clear. Just simple and plain. It is not possible for something to be the cause of itself. I and you and everyone else could not have brought ourselves to existence, because at a certain point before our existence in this life, we were nothing. If we were nothing, we needed something to bring us to life. And that thing we all call God. We all, you and me, and hopefully every believer, whether Muslim or not, will call it God. Now, what is our idea of God? That's different from one religion, from one faith to another, and that will be the second step we get at once we are done with that first step. Okay. I hope that I hope that's clear. And I hope that it would be okay that we go a little bit farther and take the third way. And if we take the third way, we'll stop there once we're done with it. And we'll have two more ways or two more proofs for the existence of God. And once we're done with it, we will, inshallah, not this coming Friday, but the Friday after, we'll have our open discussion, open class, where you guys can have the chance to ask me questions and to just, be curious and say, hey, can you explain this to us again, or I didn't understand this point, or something like that. How about you guys indicate to me in the chatting box whether or not you would like to go and have one more way kind of explained, or if you think that this is enough for today. Because again, My point is not to bore you, to cause you to be bored and struggling and then give up. My goal is to teach you, and if you just think that's enough for today, we'll be done with it. If you think you can go one more, we'll go one more. So just let me know. I'll wait for you. Keep going. All right. Half of it. All right. One more. Please, one more. Okay. That's very enthusiastic. All right. We'll take one more. Um, so, the third way is taken from what we call possibility and necessity. And it goes that way. We take it from possibility and necessity. So the first way, we take it from motion, meaning change and growth. The second way, we took it from nature and what we call the efficient causality and effect. The third way, we take it what we call the possibility and necessity, things being possible and things being necessary. Possible meaning could exist and could not exist. Like really, like either the world will exist and function as just as much whether or not certain things exist or in it or no. But there are other things that must exist for the world itself to exist. We'll look at this in detail. We'll take one little at a time. Let's read first and then explain as we go. We find in nature, again, see how he always look at nature, because he's allowing people, and that's why I always advise Muslims, get out of the house, get out of being trapped between four walls. Go in nature, whether you go for a hike, for a walk, for a run, for a picnic. Alhamdulillah, as Muslims in America, we live in a country where there are so many beautiful scenery for us to see. There are people who live in countries where they can't afford, whether their time or their financial ability, or even nature does not exist, or if it does, it's only allowed for people who have money and time and luxury. So we live in a world where just driving 5 minutes away from town, you can be in a beautiful nature, listen to the birds, look at the trees, enjoy the running water, because that is not just for fun. You don't just do that for fun. Yes, you enjoy it absolutely to the fullest of your heart, but also it is for your faith. We can not only rely on reading the Quran or learning our deen from lectures and videos and from imams and mashayikh and ulama and scholars. We learn also to strengthen our deen from nature as well. That's why when you read the Quran, Allah says, أَفَلَا يَنظُرُونَ. Get out of there, close the mushaf and get out there and look at nature, look and contemplate and think. Note to parents, help your kids read, help them think, help them reflect. It's fun and good to have screen time, video game time, but it's also important to get some nature time. There are people who go for observatories and they immerse themselves in learning about the universe in a way where they observe the stars and they have this connection with the natural world. Because again, you can see that almost all of these 5 ways of proving God's existence, all of them come from nature. So he says we find in nature things that are possible to be and not to be, since they are found to be generated and not corrupt, and consequently they are possible to be and not to be. What does that mean? There are things in the world around us that are possible to exist, to be, that come into being and go out of being. We call them contingent beings, like things that, like people. If we did not exist, at a certain point we did not. At a certain point, we now exist, and then we're gonna die again, and life will continue. Absolutely, like, not big changes in the world will happen. But it is impossible for these always to exist, meaning, like, for me, it is impossible to always exist, to always have existed and always exist in the future and always exist in the present and in the past. For that which is possible not to be at some time is not. Again, for me, let me take me as an example. At a certain point, I was non-existent, and at a certain point I am now existent, and then I will be non-existent again. So this is the whole idea and the premise and the very beginning of that proof of God's existence. Therefore, if everything is possible not to be, then at one time there could have been nothing in existence. If you imagine that everything in that universe, you name it, planets, stars, plants, animals, people, again, food, rocks, all the things. If we can imagine that everything in the universe, absolutely everything, is possible not to exist, then maybe at a certain point, like, the universe was basically empty. There was absolutely nothing. Okay? Is this good so far? Now, if this was true, even now there would be nothing in existence, because that which does not exist only begins to exist by something already existing. What does this mean? It's very complicated. Please explain it to us. All right. That means now we imagined that all the things in the world are only possible to exist or not to exist. Then there could have been a moment in history, in life, the life of this big universe, where nothing existed. There was zero things. This is a kind of actually a cool and at the same time scary idea. To think that, close your eyes and imagine that nothing exists. Like, if nothing exists, what is actually there? Like void, zero. If we imagine that, we have a problem. Because the problem is as following. How did then everything actually came to existence? Because there should have been something out there that kind of sparked and initiated and started the existence of the world as we now see it and feel it and sense it and touch it and observe it. Do you see that problem? That's a big problem. So if we imagine that the world at a certain point was empty, there was nothing, including God, this is a big problem, because how did the world come to existence then? Then there must have been something in the world out there. He says, therefore, if at one time nothing was in existence, it would have been impossible for anything to have begun to exist. And thus, even now, nothing would be in existence, which is absurd, because we look around us and we see things. Therefore, not all things are merely possible, but there must exist something, the existence of which is necessary. So when you sit around and make that mental exercise of imagining the world is void and empty of everything, you have to keep one thing that is necessary to exist. So the world is totally empty, but there's one thing that is out there. That one thing is what going to spark and start and initiate the existence of everything as we see it and observe it now. That's how on the day of judgment, there is that moment that sometimes people say, that people kind of have a hard time imagining on the day of judgment everything is gonna disappear and collapse except for Allah. وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ ذو الجلال والإكرام. Actually, this is in Surah Al-Rahman. If you memorize Surah Al-Rahman, you know exactly what I'm talking about. كل من عليها فان. كل is a word that we describe to encompass everything. So actually, this is gonna happen at the end of times. There will be a moment where كل من عليها فان. Everything in the universe, and I mean everything, will disappear. كل من عليها فان ويبقى وجه ربك ذو الجلال والإكرام. The only thing that will remain is God. So what we call God necessary being. So he says, but every necessary thing either has its necessity caused by another or not. So if we say that God is necessary existent, so someone might ask a good question. Well, maybe that necessity in God was caused by another thing. Sure, I will say, okay, it was caused by another thing. But it is impossible to go on to infinity in necessary things which have their necessity caused by another, as has been already proved in regard to efficient cause. Like we said before, we cannot go in that cycle and the chain of causality and effect forever. So even if you say that God's necessity of existence was caused by something else, okay, we can go and say, okay, that was caused by something else, and something else caused it, and something else caused it. But even then, we cannot go forever and ever and ever. We have to come to an end with one being that its necessity in existence was not caused by something else. I wish I had a board where I can draw this to you. But anyway, therefore, we cannot but conclude the existence of some being having of itself its own necessity and not receiving it from another, but rather causing in others their necessity. This all people speak of as God. So, how can I summarize this third way to you? I can summarize it in these simple words. Imagine, close your eyes and imagine, just imagine. If you have good imagination, you will be able to do that, no problem. And imagine that the world, everything in it has disappeared. Like Allah says in Surah Al-Rahman, كُلُّ مَنْ عَلَيْهَا فَانٍ. Close your eyes and imagine that everything in the world is disappearing little by little. First, you are looking at I'm now sitting in my office looking at the trees across the parking lot. They are starting to disappear. Now the houses start to disappear. The clouds start to disappear. The sky starts to disappear. Now the earth starts to disappear, and I'm kind of floating in the space, and now I disappeared, and there is blackness, darkness, nothing but emptiness. But there must be something necessary for it to exist and to continue to exist, because it's that one thing that is going to spark and start the start life as we know it now, and that's Allah will show us that at the end of the time, as we said, كل من عليها فان ويبقى وجه ربك ذو الجلال والإكرام in Surah Al-Rahman, that everything, yes, even the angels. Yes, someone is saying, what about the angels? Yes, everything. When you practice that exercise, everything is going to disappear, including the angels, including the prophets, everything. But there will only be one thing that must necessarily, when we say necessity, that means it's necessary, it's essential, it cannot not exist. That being is Allah, is God subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let us recap. In the world we see things that are possible to be and possible not to be. In other words, perishable things, things that perishable, that kind of like you can think of them as has an expiration date. If you look at everything around us, everything has an expiration date. But if everything were contingent and thus capable of going out of existence, then nothing would exist now. But things clearly do exist now, therefore there must be something that is imperishable, a necessary being. This everyone understands to be God. So the next time someone says God doesn't exist, tell them, sorry, too bad, bad argument. You cannot say that, because as we look in the world, things do exist, and there must be something that brought them to existence. With that ends the third way of proving the existence of God, as has been explained by Saint Thomas Aquinas, who was a theologian and philosopher from the Catholic faith. He was actually known as the Doctor of the Church, because he was able to explain the existence of God in ways that kind of solved the problems for people, who had many doubts in God and the existence of God as we know it now. So I am gonna be online for another 10 or 15 minutes. If you have any questions, go ahead and send them my way. If I'm able to answer them, I will. If I'm not, then I will. I'll tell you that I will research the answer and share them with you in the future. Remember, next time we're gonna finish the last two ways, and then the time after that we're gonna have an open discussion session for people to ask questions and for us to discuss with each other what we have learned so far. Don't forget, there's a handout that I sent. It's handout number 1 that summarizes all the 5 ways.